Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with ENCA. Now, South Africa has turned to fellow BRICS member China for assistance in the fight against rolling blackouts. After agreeing to come to South Africa's rescue, China donated 167 million rand for emergency power. Public facilities such as clinics are set to benefit from this donation. China also offered South Africa a 500 million rand grant for development. For more on this and reaction to it, we are joined by energy expert Mohammed Mahdi. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahdi, for your time here on ENCA. Let's talk about these 8 businesses that we've signed with. I read that the State Grid Corporation of China, for instance, made a deal with Italy back in 2014. Same deal as ours, 3-year contract, and after 3 years you have the option to renew. Italy seems to have renewed their deal with this company. Do you think it's going to benefit us, even though our problems and Italy's problems when it comes to power are not the same?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think, look, the cooperation with China can be very important. China is a major equipment supplier. In fact, most, if not the majority, of solar PV panels are produced in China, and so too with various other pieces of equipment. So a relationship with China is clearly very beneficial, it's very useful, and in the long term, as well as in the short term, can yield benefits. But perhaps what we should do is just put some of these numbers in perspective.
Yeah.
So China is providing a 500 million rand grant, roughly, and 167 million rand additional assistance. Now, these numbers are minuscule. In the context of energy, in the context of what the country needs, they are absolutely minuscule. They will have almost no impact. To put that in perspective, let's compare numbers that the private sector is spending. So the private sector currently spends around 2 billion rand every quarter. Private sector plus individual homeowners and small businesses spend almost 2 billion rand every quarter on renewable energy, whether it's battery energy storage, whether it's solar systems, whether it's energy efficiency initiatives. That's the amount that the private sector by itself spends. So this is less than a quarter of what the private sector spends every 3 months. It's going to make absolutely no impact. So it's a token move, I think, but don't expect any major long-term benefits from it.
Mr. Mahdi, let's talk about the money itself. 167 million rand, 500 million rand. We all know how much has been spent on our power stations to try and fix Eskom, right? And we know what happened to that money and how the projects kept on ballooning. So you can understand South Africans that are feeling a little bit despondent about this. And the minister just saying on Tuesday that donations are not attached to any conditions is too broad, am I right? In terms of explaining and being transparent to us exactly what it means we do for China with what they're doing, how this money is going to be spent, where it's going to go, etc. This answer was just a little bit too broad.
I'd agree, it is too broad. We definitely need more specifics. But at the same time, let's not be derailed by what is a very, very small intervention. It's going to have no... We certainly need to have accountability of what happens to the money. And because it's going to be such a small impact, we need to be sure about what we are handing over, what we are promising in return to China for this very small assistance. So absolutely right. I think we need a lot more clarity with regard to that. But we also just need to completely put this in perspective. It's less than 0.5% of Eskom's annual revenue. So it's a very minuscule amount.
It's a little bit of assistance. Now, the chairperson of the China-Africa Development Fund spoke at BRICS on the sidelines of that signing ceremony now. I just want to quote exactly what he said, and I'm just going to read it off of the piece of paper. He suggested that South Africa should streamline bidding and tender processes and relax BEE regulations to be more efficient. When it comes to red tape, of course, we know that the President's energy plan from last year did speak about that. But BEE is also a very sensitive issue when it comes to South Africa, etc. What's your make of what he's saying in terms of BEE red tape and just, streamlining our bidding?
I think with due respect, is from the perspective of external parties, certainly not from the perspective of what's important for South Africa. What we do need to streamline is the process of approvals for new generation capacity and for grid strengthening. But we definitely do not need to streamline or loosen or relax procurement regulations. And certainly, BEE has its own role. I think that's a much wider and much broader debate. In the energy industry, we still don't have sufficient transformation. And where there is transformation, there are several players who are, taking the lion's share. So the BEE, the way it's being executed within the energy industry is not ideal. It needs an overhaul. It needs to be relooked at. It's certainly not in the way that, was just quoted now. And just to stress, what we need to do is speed up new generation capacity as quickly as possible. Remove that red tape, not necessarily the red tape on Eskom's procurement process.
Well, obviously, I'm a South African who feels as though we will accept all the help we need because load shedding, you and I will agree that it's become worse in the past few years, right? And then there are those critics who are saying we're becoming too reliant on China. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, I think, as a South African, if I speak not just as an energy expert, but as a South African, I'm actually incensed at the way we go about, with a begging bowl to these companies, to these countries rather, and for small amounts. We have the capability and we have the wherewithal, we have the expertise, we have the know-how in this country to solve the problem. What we need is the political and administrative will to overcome these issues. We are not going to overcome these issues by constantly asking for assistance. We really do have the internal capacity to overcome this. It's a question of undertaking the right decision-making processes and having the right leadership. I think the sooner we get used to solving our own problems, as opposed to going to other countries, the better. And the other point, there's a really negative aspect to continuously asking for this kind of aid. We as a country, and I remember back in 1994, and as a political activist before that, we were punching above our weight. We were taken very seriously on the international stage, and even now we still are to a certain extent. We are one of the players within BRICS. Now, imagine being one of the key players within BRICS, but at the same time putting out your begging bowl. It's not appropriate, and this is what, as a South African, is actually quite embarrassing to me.
And I think also the other issue, Mr. Mardi, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that our issues when it comes to our energy crisis are very unique to the rest of the world. The rest of the world, for instance, maybe was affected by the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the nuclear suddenly being unavailable and they had to procure coal at a faster pace. Other countries, it's probably, innocently or really running out of what they use. Whereas with us, the uniqueness comes in with the fact that there was corruption also involved there. So, whatever deals we sign, I think there's going to have to be a hawk's eye on how the money is used, right?
100% correct. And I think we need to have some form of formal oversight body that is multi-party or at least very independent. It is urgent, even where we are. And also the same body needs to have certain, leverage when it comes to the kinds of decisions that are made that's going to affect the long-term health of the electricity infrastructure. So I think you're quite correct. At the very least, we need oversight in terms of how money is spent, how money is brought in, and what promises are made in return.